Hello, listener. It's time to dive into the Juniverse, where tales of infidelity, betrayal, and heart-wrenching confessions pull you into the vast unknown.
Jason had always been defined by his work. As a senior mechanic at a well-known heavy equipment repair company, he had little time for anything beyond the sound of engines and the rumble of machines. His life was a constant cycle of overtime, grease-stained hands, and mechanical problems that never ceased. His wife, Rachel, had learned to accept his absence. Their children, Noah and Lily, were used to his long hours. Rachel, a passionate and nurturing schoolteacher, had planned a weekend getaway with her sisters, Jenny and Claire. The plan was simple: 3 days of relaxation in a cabin by the lake, filled with swimming, campfires, and the unspoken promise of family bonding. Rachel had already prepared everything. She imagined it would be a chance to catch up with her sisters and give the kids some well-needed fun. But when Jason arrived home one Thursday afternoon, something unexpected happened. He walked into the kitchen, his boots scraping the floor, and saw Rachel chopping vegetables for dinner, her face illuminated by the soft light of the overhead lamp. The children were in the living room, watching TV, but there was a different energy in the house that evening. "I'm free this weekend," Jason said, his voice low, almost unsure. "I'll come with you all to the lake." Rachel stopped chopping and looked up, her expression flickering with surprise, followed by something else. Relief, perhaps? A quiet joy. Her hands paused, and she wiped a few stray hairs from her face. "That sounds wonderful," she said, her smile genuine. "The kids will love having you around, and I'm sure we'll have plenty of time to unwind." Jason felt a wave of warmth wash over him. He'd missed these moments. He hadn't been able to attend family vacations for months, his work demanding far too much of his attention. To hear Rachel's response, he felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, their family life wasn't as fractured as it sometimes felt. "I'll bring the dirt bike along too," Jason added, the excitement creeping into his voice. "There are some trails I want to explore while we're there." Rachel hesitated for a moment, her eyes softening as she thought about the logistics. "Of course, as long as you're sure it won't be too much trouble," she replied, with the ever-patient tone she always used. Jason nodded, grateful for her understanding. "I'll be fine. I just need to clear my head a bit." He grabbed his jacket from the chair, the relief at the sudden change in his routine hitting him like a breath of fresh air. For the first time in months, Jason felt a sense of anticipation, a genuine eagerness to reconnect with his family. Little did he know, this weekend would bring a storm he wasn't prepared for, a storm that would unravel everything he thought he knew about the woman he loved. As Jason headed to the garage to prepare his bike, Rachel stood there for a moment, watching him, a small, almost imperceptible frown crossing her face before she quickly masked it with another smile. Something about the situation felt off, but she couldn't put her finger on it. She shook her head, dismissing the thought. After all, everything seemed fine, didn't it? By the time the family arrived at the cabin, the afternoon air was crisp, a cool breeze gently stirring the tall pines surrounding the property. The sound of the lake rippled in the distance, and the kids ran ahead, eager to explore the unfamiliar terrain. The place had been set up by Rachel's sisters, Jenny and Claire, who had clearly been looking forward to the weekend. They bustled around the cabin, chatting excitedly, setting up the fire pit, and organizing the kitchen, while Jason unloaded his dirt bike, feeling a sense of purpose as he assembled it for the trail rides that had been in his mind since the moment he heard about the trip. Yet, despite the idyllic setting, something felt strange to him. His stomach churned with a nagging unease, an itch he couldn't scratch. Jason tried to shake it off, attributing it to the stress of work and the sudden change in plans. But no matter how much he tried to engage in the weekend's activities, that feeling remained, hanging in the air like a dark cloud. After dinner, as the evening sun dipped behind the trees, the family settled in. The sounds of laughter and children's chatter filled the cabin, but Jason's mind was elsewhere. It was Rachel. Something about her behavior had been off. It was subtle, but unmistakable. She seemed a little too distracted, a little too distant. Later, when the kids were snuggled up on the couch, watching a movie, Jason decided to head upstairs to their shared bedroom to grab a few things. As he walked in, he found Rachel hunched over her laptop, her fingers typing rapidly. He'd never been one to pry, but something about the urgency in her movements made him pause. The moment she noticed him, Her hand darted to the keyboard, and with a few swift keystrokes, she minimized the screen and closed the laptop, giving him a tight, almost forced smile. "Just wrapping up a few things for work," Rachel said, her voice higher than usual. She looked flustered, as if caught in the act. Jason's gut twisted. There was nothing wrong with working while on vacation. He himself had spent hours repairing machines during family trips, but her behavior struck him as odd. Why was she so quick to hide what she was doing? "Don't worry about it," Jason said, trying to shake off the feeling that had begun to grow. "I'm going to check the maps for the trails tomorrow." Rachel nodded, but the tension in the air was palpable. As Jason moved around the room to rummage through the closet for his trail maps, he couldn't help but glance at the laptop. The screen was dark, but the faint glow from the keyboard illuminated Rachel's face, which had tightened into something unfamiliar, something he couldn't quite place. His instincts screamed at him. Something wasn't right. Later that night, after the kids had gone to bed and the sounds of the campfire crackled in the distance, Jason tried to shake off the uneasy feeling gnawing at him. He headed back into the room to change and stumbled upon something that made his blood run cold. While looking for his trail maps in the closet, Jason's hand brushed against something small and slick, a small, folded piece of paper. He instinctively pulled it out and opened it. At first, it seemed like a simple note. But then his eyes froze on the last line. Rachel had deleted it. He was sure of it. His heart pounded in his chest. It wasn't just a note. It was an email, hastily erased from her inbox. Without thinking, Jason opened her email account. Rachel never deleted anything without second-guessing it. She was meticulous, always. But this was different. Jason's fingers trembled as he navigated to the deleted folder, something he rarely did. His eyes flicked back and forth, scanning the screen, until he saw it, a message marked with urgency. The subject line made his heart drop. "Change of plans for the weekend. Jason's joining us, but don't worry, I'll make sure to see you. David." The name felt foreign. Jason's pulse quickened. Who was David? And why was Rachel making secret plans with him? The email felt like a punch to the gut. His eyes kept returning to the name David. Why hadn't Rachel ever mentioned him before? Why had she been hiding it? The questions piled on top of each other, each one more suffocating than the last. Who was this David? What kind of plans were they making? The sickening feeling in Jason's stomach deepened, and a horrible realization began to settle in his chest. This was no innocent communication. This was something else. As his mind spun in a whirlpool of confusion and betrayal, Jason couldn't bring himself to read the entire email. It didn't matter. What mattered was that Rachel was hiding something he wasn't ready to face. Something that was about to tear their world apart. Jason's mind raced as he stared at the email. The words floating in front of him like a cruel joke. David. The name echoed in his mind, repeating itself like a relentless drumbeat. His stomach twisted into knots as a dark suspicion crept into his thoughts. Was this the same David? The same man from Rachel's past? The one she never mentioned? The one she'd kept hidden away? Only to bring him into their lives now, under the veil of secrecy? His hands shook as he pulled himself up from the bed and walked over to the shelf, where Rachel's old high school yearbook sat, gathering dust. He had seen it 1,000 times before, but never with the intent he now had. Grabbing it from the shelf, he sat down at the edge of the bed, feeling the weight of what he was about to uncover. The familiar smell of aged paper filled his nostrils as he flipped through the pages, each turn of the page feeling like a step deeper into a dark abyss. And then, there it was. A picture of Rachel and a tall, handsome man, David, at the senior prom. They were young, carefree. Their arms wrapped around each other, their smiles wide with the kind of innocence that only high school romances could foster. Jason's breath caught in his throat. His heart hammered in his chest as he stared at the photograph. The man in the picture had an easy confidence about him, a sort of charm that radiated even through the faded image. Was this the same David? The name matched, but that could be a coincidence. But something in Jason's gut told him otherwise. It was him. There was no doubt about it now. The smile? The look in Rachel's eyes, it was unmistakable. This was the man she had once shared her youthful dreams with, the man she had once held close in the naive glow of high school romance. Jason's stomach churned, the cold realization settling in like a stone in the pit of his stomach. Why hadn't she ever mentioned him? Why had she kept this man, this part of her past, locked away in the dark corners of her memories? And more importantly, why was she in contact with him now? The questions ate away at him, each one more painful than the last. Could it be that she never truly let go of David? That all these years, despite their marriage, despite their children, there was still a part of her that was holding on to the past? His fingers lingered on the page, tracing the edges of Rachel's smiling face in the photo. Had he always been the safe option? The reliable, hard-working man who provided for the family, while David was the one who made her heart race. Jason shook his head, trying to push the thoughts away, but they stuck to him like tar, heavy and suffocating. He couldn't just let it go. There was too much at stake. He needed answers. But as he stared at the picture, one thing became clear to him. This was no coincidence. This David, whoever he was now, had reappeared in Rachel's life for a reason. And Jason wasn't sure he was ready for what that reason might be. The next day, Jason tried to push it all out of his mind. But the nagging feeling wouldn't relent. He went through the motions of the day, the kids running around, the laughter at breakfast, the cool breeze by the lake, but in the back of his mind, Rachel's secret hung over him like a storm cloud. The thought of David, of their history together, was consuming. He tried to focus on his dirt bike. But even that failed to distract him from the haunting image of the prom picture, of Rachel's youth, of her past, of David. By afternoon, Jason could no longer ignore it. His heart raced as he made his decision. He had to confront her. He needed to know if his suspicions were true. He couldn't go on pretending everything was fine when he felt this cold weight in his chest. The truth, no matter how painful, was something he had to uncover. And so, with a trembling hand, he walked toward Rachel, who was sitting on the porch, watching the kids play by the water. The sun was beginning to set, casting an orange glow over the lake. The air smelled of pine and campfire smoke, but Jason's mind was far from the peaceful surroundings. "Rachel," he said, his voice tight, controlled. "We need to talk." Her eyes flickered up to meet his, a shadow of worry crossing her face. She sensed something was wrong. "What about?" she asked, her tone casual, yet wary. Jason's gaze hardened as he stood before her, the weight of the moment bearing down on him. "Who is David?" he asked, his voice low but cutting through the silence like a knife. Rachel froze, her face paling. The smile slipped from her lips, and for a moment, she looked like a deer caught in headlights. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Jason didn't wait for her to explain. His hands clenched into fists, his jaw set. "Don't lie to me, Rachel. I saw the email. I found your yearbook. I know who he is." Rachel's breath hitched. And for a moment, Jason thought he might see tears in her eyes. Instead, her gaze hardened, and she stood up abruptly, as if to distance herself from the confrontation. Jason. "Please, it's not what you think," Rachel stammered, but Jason could see the guilt in her eyes. The silence that followed felt like an eternity, the air between them thick with unspoken truths. The fire was finally about to burn, and Jason was ready to watch it all unfold, no matter the cost. The weekend dragged on like a slow, agonizing crawl. Jason did his best to keep busy, retreating into the woods, escaping into the trails on his dirt bike. The trails offered temporary relief, but nothing could shake the gnawing feeling that kept eating away at him. The distance between him and Rachel had been growing, and it felt like every moment he spent trying to ignore the truth was only making it worse. He watched from a distance as Rachel and her family laughed, enjoyed their meals together, and played games by the campfire. The kids were happy, the sisters were chattering away, and everyone seemed to be in a world of their own except for Jason. He felt like an outsider, a mere spectator to the life he thought he knew so well. And then, in the early afternoon, he saw it. The dark green SUV that had been parked by a secluded cabin for most of the weekend. It stood there, as though mocking him. The vehicle that belonged to David. The very same man whose name had turned Jason's life upside down. Jason's fists clenched. The sight of that SUV, the symbol of his betrayal, set his heart racing. It wasn't just a car. It was a reminder of everything he feared, the past Rachel had hidden from him, the secret relationship she'd been keeping, and the man who had come back into their lives with the intent to shatter everything Jason had built. The silence between him and Rachel had never felt louder. Every moment of their marriage felt like a lie. But the worst was yet to come. That night, as the fire crackled by the lake and the children ran around, laughter floating through the air, Jason stood by the tree line, watching. His eyes darted over to the cabin where Rachel and David had been staying. The tension in his chest tightened like a knot, his breath coming in shallow bursts. His instincts screamed at him to confront her, to demand the truth. But something held him back, a primal curiosity. No, a need to see it for himself. He watched as David, tall and relaxed, walked over to the group, greeting Rachel's sisters warmly. The exchange was casual, like old friends meeting after a long time. But Jason knew better. He had seen this play out before in movies and books, but never in his own life. He had never imagined this moment, his moment, would be so heartbreaking. David gave a few nods to Rachel's sisters before he casually strolled toward the cabin where Rachel was staying. Jason's heart beat faster as he moved quickly but quietly through the underbrush, making sure not to be seen. The air around him thickened, the sounds of the fire and the children's laughter growing distant as his focus honed in on the cabin. He reached the side of the cabin, keeping a low profile. The small window provided the only view into the room. His pulse raced, every fiber of his being wanting to look away. But his feet were glued to the ground. And he found himself peeking through the glass, unable to stop himself. What he saw shattered him. Through the dim light of the cabin, he saw Rachel and David together, sitting close, too close. Jason's breath caught in his throat as he took in the scene. It wasn't just their proximity, it was the way they looked at each other. The way their eyes locked, and how Rachel, once so cold and distant with him, now had that same familiar sparkle in her eyes, the one she had when she first fell in love with him. That innocent, fire-lit gleam. But it wasn't for him anymore. It was for David. Rachel reached out, her fingers gently grazing David's hand, an unconscious intimacy that Jason had once thought was reserved only for them. David didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned in closer, his body language open, inviting. Jason's stomach churned as he watched them exchange quiet words, their faces inches apart. Then, Rachel laughed, a soft, hushed laugh that only David could elicit. Jason felt as though the sound sliced through him like a knife, a reminder of everything he had lost and everything he would never get back. The most damning part wasn't the actions. They weren't explicit, not yet, but the connection. The electric charge between them, the ease with which they fell into old rhythms. The unspoken history between them. It was clear in that moment. Rachel had never truly let go of David. He wasn't just a figure from her past. He was a part of her present. Jason's hand trembled as he pressed it against the window, his breath fogging up the glass. His mind was reeling. How long had this been going on? How many years had she been hiding this secret? Was this the reason for the distance in their marriage? Was this why Rachel had been so withdrawn lately? The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. Rachel had been keeping this from him. This, for so long, pretending it was nothing when all along, she had been waiting for the right moment to bring him back into her life. His head spun. Anger bubbled beneath the surface, threatening to spill over. But at the same time, there was a deep, aching sorrow, an overwhelming sadness that he couldn't shake. In that moment, as he watched them exchange glances and soft words, Jason felt like the last piece of his world was crumbling. This was no longer a simple misunderstanding. This wasn't a passing affair or a brief flirtation. This was Rachel's past clawing its way back into their lives, threatening to take everything Jason had worked for. The fire crackled in the distance, but Jason was numb to the warmth of it now. The cold truth of what he had just witnessed chilled him to his bones. Jason stood frozen, his heart pounding as he listened through the window. Rachel's voice, soft and apologetic, pierced the air. "I'm so sorry, David. I didn't know Jason was coming, but I'll distract him. I'll make it up to you." David's teasing reply followed. "I'll be waiting. Can't wait until tonight." Jason's breath hitched. Then came the sounds he dreaded, the rustling of clothes. Breaths quickening, a soft gasp. His world shattered. Every ounce of control left him as he listened to the betrayal unfold. His hands gripped the window frame, struggling to steady himself. He had heard enough. Jason couldn't stay silent anymore. He stormed toward the cabin, heart racing with fury. Bursting through the door, he found Rachel and David frozen. Rachel's eyes widened in shock, her guilt evident. "How long, Rachel? How long have you been lying to me?" Jason's voice was cold, cutting through the silence. Rachel looked away, unable to respond. David stepped forward, but Jason's glare silenced him. "No, David. This is between me and her." The weight of the moment hung heavy in the air. Jason saw it in Rachel's eyes, the regret, the guilt. It was over. She had made her choice. Fury boiled inside Jason. He couldn't confront Rachel yet. He needed to let the anger simmer. So he headed to the fire pit, his hands trembling as he stacked the logs with deliberate care. The flames flickered as night descended, casting long shadows over the campsite. The kids gathered around, oblivious to the storm brewing in Jason's heart, their laughter floating in the air as they eagerly prepared for the marshmallow roast. But Jason was beyond reach now. His mind raced with thoughts of Rachel, of David, of the betrayal that had shattered everything. The fire crackled, and his resolve hardened. When Rachel and David finally emerged from the cabin, acting as though nothing had changed, Jason's rage reached a boiling point. Without warning, he grabbed the blanket and towels they had carelessly left behind. The act felt almost mechanical, as if everything had led to this moment. With a single motion, he threw the blanket onto the fire. The flames roared to life, climbing higher, devouring the cloth in seconds. The fire's orange glow painted the campsite in an eerie light as it consumed their personal items. Jason walked toward them, his expression calm, betraying nothing of the storm inside. "I hope you enjoy the heat," he said, his voice a chilling whisper. Rachel froze, her face draining of color as she realized what he had done. Panic flashed in her eyes. "Jason, please. What are you doing?" Jason's eyes locked onto hers, cold with betrayal. "Just making sure you're warm enough for the rest of the night," he replied, his words sharp as ice. Jason couldn't take it anymore. The lies, the deception, it was too much. He had to leave, to escape the suffocating reality of his broken marriage. He couldn't confront Rachel right now. He didn't want to hear her excuses, her pleas. The betrayal cut too deep, and the weight of it crushed him. As he sped away from the campsite, the sight of David's SUV on the side of the road caught his eye. Steam was rising from the engine, and for a moment, Jason hesitated. Then, something inside him snapped. He couldn't resist. He pulled over. His pulse raced as he grabbed a few items from the vehicle. Personal effects, a wallet, and anything that might give him leverage. As quickly as he had stopped, he was gone again, speeding down the road toward the nearest town. Later that night, Jason found himself in a dimly lit motel room, his body weary, but his mind wide awake. He had done something he never thought he would. He had broken into David's home. Inside the house, he found a hard drive, buried in a drawer, containing emails and messages that revealed the full extent of the affair. Jason felt sick as he plugged the hard drive into his laptop. The screen flickered to life, and he scrolled through the messages between Rachel and David. The truth was ugly, much uglier than Jason could have imagined. The emails chronicled their secret meetings, their intimate exchanges, the promises made behind his back. The pain was suffocating, and for a moment, Jason felt the full weight of the betrayal. But as he read on, he realized he didn't need to read every message. He didn't need to dig any deeper. The truth was already clear. It had been staring him in the face the entire time, and now it was too much to bear. He closed the laptop with a quiet finality. There would be no more searching for answers. No more confronting Rachel. The decision had already been made. It was over. Rachel had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. The life they had built together was nothing but a lie. And Jason was done. He had nothing left to say, nothing left to fight for. He was ready to leave it all behind. Jason packed the last of his things into his truck, the weight of the decisions he had made pressing down on him. The familiar hum of the engine filled the silence as he started the drive home. The world around him felt distant, as though everything he had known was slipping away. His mind was still clouded with the memories, the pain, the anger, the crushing betrayal. But beneath it all, something else stirred, a faint sense of relief. The truth had come to light. It wasn't the closure he had hoped for, nor the peace he had wanted, but it was the clarity he needed. No longer would he live in the shadow of Rachel's lies. As the miles passed by, Jason felt a strange shift inside him, like a weight lifting from his shoulders. Rachel had destroyed everything they had built together. She had torn apart the family, the trust, the life they had shared. But in the wake of it all, Jason realized something he hadn't known before. He was still standing. Despite the wreckage, he was still whole. Stronger, even. As he drove, the road ahead seemed endless. But for the first time in a long time, Jason didn't feel lost. He didn't feel like the man who had been broken by betrayal. He was something else now, something new. The ashes of his old life were still smoldering, but he would rise from them. He would rebuild. He wasn't a man defined by Rachel's lies anymore. He was a man with a future. And as he drove further from the past, Jason finally understood. He was free. Thank you for following Jason's journey. If you were in his shoes, how would you confront the truth? At what point would you decide to walk away? And how would you rebuild your life after such a betrayal? Was it the email, the photo, or the intimate moment between Rachel and David that made the truth undeniable? Reflect on Jason's choices and consider what you would do in his place.